12 years after Captain Lydia Ashworth was declared killed in action during a classified mission in Afghanistan, surveillance cameras captured something impossible: a woman matching her exact description walking through Pentagon security checkpoints with valid credentials that shouldn't exist. What happened next would expose a conspiracy so deep it threatened the very foundations of national security. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind carried the scent of fallen leaves across Arlington National Cemetery as Master Sergeant Joaquin Reyes adjusted his dress blues one final time. 12 years. 12 long years since he'd watched Captain Lydia Phoenix Ashworth board that transport helicopter at Fort Blackstone, her confident smile barely visible beneath her kevlar helmet in the pre-dawn darkness. 12 years since she'd vanished without a trace during what command called a routine intelligence gathering mission in the mountains of Afghanistan. The memorial service was supposed to bring closure, but for Hawk, it only deepened the wound that had never properly healed. He stared at the black granite wall where her name was etched alongside hundreds of other fallen heroes. Captain Lydia M. Ashworth, U.S. Army Intelligence. Operation Nightfall. Presumed killed in action. The gold lettering seemed to mock him as he remembered their final conversation in the equipment bay at Fort Blackstone. "If anything happens to me, Hawk," she'd said, pressing a sealed envelope into his calloused hands, "don't open this unless something impossible occurs. And if the Pentagon systems ever go completely dark during a national emergency, remember Protocol 7. He'd asked what Protocol 7 meant. She'd only smiled and said, "You'll know when you need to know." Now, surrounded by nearly 200 personnel in pressed uniforms, Hawk clutched that same envelope in his jacket pocket. The paper had yellowed with age, the wax seals still intact despite 12 years of him carrying it everywhere. He'd never understood why she'd given it to him, never understood the cryptic instructions, but something in her eyes that day had told him it was important. General Augustus Fletcher stepped to the podium, his weathered face grave as his voice carried across the silent assembly. "Today, we honor those who gave their lives in service to our nation. Captain Ashworth represents the finest of our intelligence officers, brilliant, dedicated, and willing to venture into the darkest corners of the world to keep America safe." Behind Fletcher, the American flag hung at half-mast against the gray October sky, its fabric rippling in the crisp wind. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. The chaplain's prayer echoed across the headstones, followed by the haunting notes of taps played by a lone bugler. When they reached the reading of names, Hawk felt his throat tighten. Lydia had been 29, the youngest officer ever cleared for the Pentagon's most classified intelligence operations. She graduated summa cum laude from West Point, earned a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown, and spoke 6 languages fluently. The Army had invested millions in her training, and she'd repaid that investment with unwavering loyalty until the day she disappeared forever. Dr. Penelope Strand, the Army's chief psychologist, stood beside Hawk throughout the ceremony. She'd been the one to counsel him through his survivor's guilt after Lydia's disappearance, watching him blame himself for 12 years despite having no logical reason to do so. "You look troubled, Hawk," she whispered, noting the tension in his weathered face, "more than usual for these occasions." Hawk turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting a pain that had never fully healed. She shouldn't be on this wall, Doc. Phoenix was too smart, too careful. She had contingencies for everything. That had been Lydia's trademark, her ability to anticipate problems 3 moves ahead, to have backup plans for her backup plans. The idea that she'd simply walked into an ambush and died didn't fit with everything he knew about her tactical brilliance. "The report said she was captured during a reconnaissance mission that went sideways," Dr. Strand replied gently. "Sometimes even the best operators encounter situations beyond their control." But her voice lacked conviction. She'd read Lydia's psychological profile dozens of times, had recommended her for the most sensitive assignments. The young captain had possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people and situations, to blend into any environment and extract information that others couldn't access. "The report said a lot of things," Hawk muttered, his fingers tracing the outline of the envelope in his pocket. "Phoenix told me things, too. Things that didn't make it into any official file." He'd spent 12 years analyzing every detail of her final mission, every piece of intelligence that had led to her deployment, every communication from the field before she went silent. Nothing about it made sense.
Lieutenant Zara Holloway, General Fletcher's aide, approached them with a tablet displaying the day's memorial schedule. At 26, she was roughly the same age Lydia had been when she disappeared, and something about her earnest dedication reminded Hawk of his lost friend. "Master Sergeant Reyes," she said softly, "the general would like to speak with you after the ceremony. He mentioned something about classified materials related to Captain Ashworth's service record." Hawk's pulse quickened. In 12 years, no one had ever wanted to discuss classified aspects of Lydia's work. Her entire service record, beyond basic biographical information, remained sealed under national security protocols. Did he say what kind of materials? "No, sir. Only that recent developments have prompted a review of certain operations from that time period." Holloway glanced around nervously, as if she'd already said too much. "He'll be in Conference Room 7 at 1400 hours. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Hawk remained standing before the memorial wall. The November sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cemetery, and something about the quality of light reminded him of that final evening at Fort Blackstone. Lydia had been different that night, more focused than usual, but also strangely calm, as if she'd already accepted whatever fate awaited her in the Afghan mountains. Dr. Strand placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Hawk, you've carried this guilt for 12 years. Whatever the general wants to discuss, I hope it finally gives you some peace." She had watched him struggle with survivor's guilt, convinced that he could have somehow prevented whatever happened during that final mission. The fact that he'd been stationed stateside during her deployment made his guilt irrational, but grief rarely followed logical patterns. "It's not guilt anymore, Doc," Hawk said quietly, his eyes never leaving Lydia's name on the wall. "It's certainty. Phoenix didn't die in Afghanistan. I don't know what happened to her, but she didn't die the way they said she did." The conviction in his voice was absolute, built on 12 years of analyzing every detail, every inconsistency in the official story. As the cemetery emptied around them, Hawk made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and sent a text message to a contact he hadn't used in years, a civilian intelligence analyst who had worked with Lydia on several operations before her disappearance. If recent developments were prompting reviews of old operations, then maybe it was time to start asking the questions he'd been afraid to ask for 12 years. The envelope of his pocket seemed to burn against his chest as he walked away from the memorial wall. Protocol 7. Whatever that meant, he had a growing feeling he was about to find out. The late afternoon shadows stretched longer across Arlington as Hawk drove toward his meeting with General Fletcher, unaware that in less than 48 hours, everything he thought he knew about Lydia Ashworth's fate would be shattered forever. The memorial service was over, but for Hawk, the real investigation was just beginning.
At exactly 0800 hours on a cold Monday morning, Staff Sergeant Marcus Riley sat at his monitoring station in the Pentagon's Security Operations Center, his third cup of coffee steaming beside a bank of surveillance screens. His morning shift typically involved routine badge scans, visitor processing, and the occasional VIP escort coordination. Nothing in his 8 years of Pentagon security had prepared him for what appeared on his primary monitor at 0847 hours. A red alert flashed across his screen. Unauthorized credential activation, Sector 7 clearance. Riley blinked, certain he'd misread the display. Sector 7 clearances were reserved for the most sensitive intelligence operations, and there were fewer than 50 active codes in the entire system. He tapped his keyboard, pulling up the identity verification protocol. The information that appeared made his blood run cold. Captain Lydia M. Ashworth, active service member, clearance level, Sector 7, status, authorized. "That's impossible," Riley whispered, his hands trembling as he reached for the phone. He'd been working Pentagon security when Captain Ashworth's death notification had been processed 12 years ago. He remembered the paperwork, the credential deactivation, the memorial arrangements. Dead people didn't have active security clearances. Below his station, the main security checkpoint operated with its usual morning efficiency. Hundreds of personnel streamed through the metal detectors and badge scanners, their conversations creating a familiar buzz of administrative routine. But among the crowd of uniformed officers and civilian contractors, one figure moved with a purpose that seemed to cut through the chaos like a blade. The woman approached Scanner Station 3 with confident steps. Her army dress uniform perfectly pressed despite showing signs of wear that suggested years of use. Her posture was military straight, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, but there was something in her eyes, a depth of experience that seemed far older than her apparent age. When she placed her identification card on the scanner, the system responded with a soft beep of acceptance. Sergeant Kelly Morrison, manning the checkpoint, glanced at her screen and did a double-take. The photo showed a woman who looked exactly like the person standing before her, but the issue date on the credentials was 12 years old. "Ma'am, there seems to be an issue with your identification. The system shows this card as inactive." The woman smiled, and there was something both familiar and unsettling about the expression. "Try running it again, Sergeant. Sometimes the system needs a moment to update old records." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but also a weariness that spoke of long years spent far from home. Morrison ran the card again, and this time the system not only accepted it, but flagged it with a priority notification: VIP clearance, escort required to Conference Room Alpha. The sergeant's eyes widened as she read the name on the screen. Every Pentagon security officer knew the stories of the intelligence officers who died in the line of duty. Captain Lydia Ashworth was practically a legend. "Captain," Morrison said, her voice barely above a whisper, I'll need to call this in." She reached for her radio, but the woman held up a hand. "That's exactly what you should do, Sergeant. Tell them Captain Ashworth is reporting for a scheduled briefing in Conference Room Alpha. Tell them Protocol 7 is now active." The woman's eyes held Morrison's gaze with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. In the Security Operations Center, Riley watched the exchange through the surveillance cameras, his supervisor, Colonel Jasper Montgomery, now standing behind him with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Sir, we have a woman identifying herself as Captain Lydia Ashworth requesting access to Conference Room Alpha. But sir, Captain Ashworth was declared KIA 12 years ago." Montgomery grabbed the secure phone, dialing directly to General Fletcher's office. "General, we have a situation. A woman claiming to be a deceased intelligence officer just cleared security with valid credentials. She's requesting access to a classified briefing room and mentioned something called Protocol 7. On the main floor, Morrison had completed her radio call and was now staring at the woman before her with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Ma'am, I've been instructed to provide you with an escort to Conference Room Alpha, but I have to ask, are you really Captain Ashworth? The Captain Ashworth?" The woman's expression softened slightly. "I'm a lot of things, Sergeant. Some of them might surprise you, but yes, I'm Lydia Ashworth and I have a briefing to attend. It's good to be home." As they walked through the building's maze-like interior, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that she was escorting a ghost. The woman beside her moved with the fluid confidence of someone who knew every hallway, every shortcut, every security protocol. When they passed other personnel, some did double takes, as if recognizing a face they'd only seen in memorial photographs. Major Derek Flanagan was reviewing intelligence reports in his office when his secure phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to General Fletcher, and the urgency in the general's tone immediately commanded his full attention. "Major, I need you to pull every file we have on Operation Nightfall and Captain Lydia Ashworth, everything, and I need it in Conference Room Alpha in 10 minutes. "Sir, those files are classified at the highest levels. Most of them are sealed under national security protocols." Flanagan was already moving toward his secure filing cabinet, his mind racing through the implications of the request. "I don't care if they're sealed by the president himself," Fletcher replied grimly. "A woman claiming to be Captain Ashworth just walked through our front door with valid credentials. Either we're dealing with the greatest security breach in Pentagon history, or we're about to learn that one of our most classified operations is still active." In Conference Room Alpha, a space reserved for only the most sensitive briefings, the woman who called herself Lydia Ashworth sat calmly at the polished oak table. The room's sophisticated electronic countermeasures ensured that no conversation could be monitored or recorded without authorization, making it the perfect place for discussions that could never become public knowledge. When General Fletcher entered the room accompanied by Major Flanagan and Colonel Montgomery, he found himself face to face with a woman who looked exactly like the photographs in Captain Ashworth's personnel file. The resemblance was perfect, down to a small scar above her left eyebrow that had resulted from a training accident at West Point. "General Fletcher," she said, rising from her chair with crisp military bearing, "thank you for taking this meeting on short notice. I believe Major Flanagan has brought my files." Fletcher studied her carefully, noting details that weren't visible in old photographs, lines around her eyes that spoke of stress and hardship, a slight change in her posture that suggested years of careful vigilance, calluses on her hands that indicated regular weapons training. "Before we discuss anything," he said slowly, "I need you to prove you are who you claim to be." The woman smiled, and for a moment, Fletcher caught a glimpse of the young intelligence officer he'd known 12 years ago. "Ask me something only Lydia Ashworth would know, General. Ask me about the debriefing session we had after the Prague operation. Ask me about the conversation we had in your office the night before I deployed to Afghanistan. Ask me about the recommendation you wrote for my Sector 7 clearance." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. Those were conversations that had never been documented, details that existed only in his memory and hers. "What did you tell me about the nature of intelligence work that night?" "You said that sometimes the greatest service requires the greatest sacrifice. You said that intelligence officers don't get to choose between their mission and their personal happiness. They choose their mission and hope that someday they'll be allowed to have a life again." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived those words for 12 long years. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't an imposter or a security breach. This was Captain Lydia Ashworth, somehow alive after 12 years of being listed as killed in action. The question that hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone present, was simple. Where had she been, and what had brought her home now? Fletcher slowly took his seat across from her, his mind racing through a dozen possibilities, each more extraordinary than the last. "Captain Ashworth," he said formally, "I think it's time you told us what really happened during Operation Nightfall." Lydia looked around the secure conference room, her eyes taking in the familiar surroundings she'd thought she might never see again. The weight of 12 years seemed to settle on her shoulders as she prepared to reveal truths that would shatter everything these men thought they knew about her disappearance. "Before I begin," she said, reaching into her jacket pocket, "I need someone to make a phone call. Master Sergeant Joaquin Reyes should be somewhere in this building right now. He has something that belongs to me, something I gave him 12 years ago with very specific instructions." Her voice carried an urgency that made Fletcher immediately reach for his secure phone. Within minutes, Hawk burst through the conference room door, his face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and overwhelming emotion. When he saw Lydia sitting at the table, very much alive and wearing the same confident expression he remembered, his knees nearly buckled. "Phoenix," he whispered, using her old call sign. "Jesus Christ, it's really you." "Hello, Hawk," she said softly, her professional composure cracking slightly at the sight of her oldest friend. "I told you I'd find a way to come back. Do you still have the envelope I gave you?" With trembling hands, Hawk pulled the yellowed envelope from his jacket pocket, the wax seal still intact after 12 years of faithful guardianship. "I carried it everywhere," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every damn day for 12 years, just like you asked." Lydia nodded approvingly. "Break the seal, Hawk. It's time." As Hawk carefully opened the envelope, his eyes widened at the contents. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Lydia's handwriting, along with a small electronic device that looks like a modified USB drive. He read the letter aloud, his voice growing stronger with each word. If you're reading this, it means Protocol 7 has been activated and I've returned from deep cover. The woman sitting across from you is Captain Lydia Ashworth, but she's also been Dr. Elena Vasquez, Sarah Mitchell, and half a dozen other identities over the past 12 years. I was never killed in Afghanistan. I was positioned there for the longest intelligence operation in modern military history. The room fell silent except for the hum of the electronic countermeasures. General Fletcher leaned forward, his weathered face grim. Deep cover for 12 years. That's impossible. No human being could maintain operational security for that length of time without external support. Not without support. Without acknowledged support. Protocol 7 operates outside normal military hierarchy. We report to a compartmentalized unit tasked with investigating threats that conventional intelligence services can't address, threats that come from within our own defense establishment. Major Flanagan, who had been studying the classified files, looked up sharply. Are you saying Operation Nightfall was a cover story? That your entire deployment was fabricated? Not fabricated. Repurposed. I did go to Afghanistan, just not for the reasons stated in my official orders. My mission was to disappear completely, to become a ghost in the system, while tracking something far more dangerous than Taliban insurgents. She paused, her eyes growing distant as she remembered. I was hunting traitors. Dr. Penelope Strand entered the conference room at that moment, having been summoned by General Fletcher's aide. When she saw Lydia alive and apparently healthy, her clinical training warred with her emotional shock. "This is medically impossible," she said, taking a seat. "The psychological stress of 12 years in deep cover should have resulted in complete mental breakdown." "It nearly did," Lydia admitted honestly. "There were times when I forgot who I really was. Times when I almost lost myself completely in the identities I was forced to maintain. But I had anchors, people like Hawk who kept my memory alive, missions that gave me purpose, and the knowledge that someday I'd be able to come home." Colonel Montgomery, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Captain, what kind of threats required a 12-year operation? What could be so important that you'd sacrifice your entire life?" Lydia connected the USB device to the conference room's secure computer system, and immediately the wall-mounted displays filled with documents, photographs, financial records, and communication intercepts. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial transfers in the millions of dollars, meeting locations across 3 continents, personnel files showing corrupt officials at the highest levels of government. Hawks stared at the information in disbelief, recognizing names of people he'd worked with, respected, trusted. "The network has been using legitimate defense contracts as cover for industrial espionage," Lydia continued. "They've placed personnel inside key military installations, compromised secure communication systems, and sold everything from weapons specifications to troop deployment plans. The intelligence they've gathered has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of American service members overseas." General Fletcher's face had gone pale as he recognized several names on the organizational chart. "Some of these people have Sector 7 clearances. They have access to our most sensitive operations." "That's why I had to disappear completely," Lydia explained. "The people behind the Obsidian network have security clearances that would have given them access to any conventional investigation. The only way to gather evidence was to become someone else entirely, to infiltrate their organization from the outside." Major Flanagan was scrolling through financial records on his tablet. "These transactions, we're talking about billions of dollars over more than a decade. How did they hide this level of corruption?" "By compartmentalizing their operations and using the defense budget as a money laundering system. A $20 million cost overrun on a legitimate project becomes a $20 million payment to foreign intelligence services. Equipment that never gets delivered, contracts that never get fulfilled, research projects that exist only on paper, it's all been a cover for the largest intelligence breach in American history." Dr. Strand had been studying Lydia carefully throughout the briefing, noting details that spoke to the psychological toll of her extended operation.
Lydia, what you've accomplished is extraordinary, but the personal cost must have been devastating. How did you maintain your sanity during 12 years of isolation? I focused on the mission, Lydia said simply. Every time I wanted to give up, every time I wanted to come home, I thought about the soldiers dying because of intelligence these people had sold. I thought about the operations that had been compromised, the families that had lost loved ones because someone decided that money was more important than loyalty. Hawk leaned forward, his voice intense. Phoenix, why now? What brought you back after 12 years? Lydia's expression hardened. Because the Obsidian Network is preparing for their largest operation yet. They've been planning to demonstrate their capabilities to a consortium of foreign buyers, a live proof of concept that will show they can completely compromise American military communications during a national crisis. When? Fletcher demanded. Within the next 72 hours. They're planning to trigger a coordinated cyber attack that will cripple military communications across the entire eastern seaboard. While our systems are down, they'll extract classified intelligence on a scale that will fundamentally compromise American national security for decades to come. The room erupted into controlled chaos as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about exposing past corruption. It was about preventing an active attack on American military infrastructure. Fletcher was already reaching for the secure phone to contact the Joint Chiefs of Staff, while Montgomery began coordinating with Pentagon security to lock down all access points. Captain Ashworth, you've given us the intelligence. Now tell us how we stop them. Lydia smiled for the first time since entering the room, and there was something both familiar and dangerous in the expression. That's where Protocol 7 gets interesting, General, because stopping the Obsidian Network is going to require us to become everything they think we are, traitors, conspirators, and enemies of the state, at least until we can get close enough to destroy them from within.
The secure conference room had been transformed into an impromptu war room, with additional personnel arriving every few minutes as word of the crisis spread through the Pentagon's most classified channels. Agent Brielle Cortez from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division sat across from Director Preston Wolf of the Defense Intelligence Agency, both studying the evidence Lydia had provided with expressions of growing alarm. The scope of this operation is unprecedented, Agent Cortez said, her voice tight with controlled anger. We're looking at compromised personnel at 17 different military installations, 3 major defense contractors, and at least 4 members of Congress who have been receiving payments through shell companies. Lydia stood at the front of the room using a laser pointer to highlight connections on the wall-mounted displays. The Obsidian Network operates like a cancer that's metastasized throughout the defense establishment. They recruit people who have access to classified information, but also have personal vulnerabilities, financial problems, family issues, career disappointments. They offer solutions to these problems in exchange for small favors that gradually escalate into full-scale espionage. Director Wolf leaned forward, his weathered face grim. Captain, you've been tracking these people for 12 years. How deep does their penetration go? Are we talking about a few dozen corrupt individuals or something larger? Much larger, Lydia replied, clicking to a new slide that showed the network's organizational structure. The Obsidian Network has over 300 active assets across the government and defense industry. They operate in cells, so most members don't know the full scope of the organization. A clerk in Army procurement doesn't know he's working with a Navy intelligence analyst, who doesn't know about the Air Force logistics officer, who doesn't know about the CIA operations specialist. Hawk had been studying the personnel files with growing disbelief. Phoenix, some of these names, these are people I've worked with for years. Colonel Harrison Pike from Joint Staff, Major Trevor Sinclair from Defense Intelligence. I've had beers with these guys. I've trusted them with my life. That's what makes them so effective. They're not foreign agents or obvious enemies. They're our colleagues, our friends, people we see every day and never suspect. The network specifically targets individuals who are above suspicion, decorated veterans, loyal Americans who love their country, but have been convinced that they're serving a higher purpose. Dr. Strand had been taking notes throughout the briefing, her psychological training focused on understanding the human element of the conspiracy. How do they justify their actions? How do they reconcile betraying their country with their personal sense of honor? They don't see it as betrayal. The network's leadership has convinced them that they're part of a shadow organization working to protect America from threats that the official government is too bureaucratic or politically correct to address. They believe they're patriots, serving a more enlightened version of national security. General Fletcher interrupted with an urgent question. Captain, you mentioned an imminent cyber attack. What exactly are we facing in the next 72 hours? Lydia clicked to a new display showing a map of the eastern United States, with military installations highlighted in red. The network has spent years placing personnel in key positions throughout our communications infrastructure. They've installed backdoors in critical systems, mapped our security protocols, and identified vulnerabilities that would allow them to coordinate a massive electronic warfare attack. The goal isn't to destroy our systems, but to temporarily disable them where they extract massive amounts of classified data. During the blackout period, they'll download intelligence on everything from nuclear weapon specifications to special operations personnel files. The amount of damage they could do in just a few hours would compromise American national security for decades. Agent Cortez was already coordinating with her field offices via secure phone. We need to start making arrests immediately. If we can take down the key personnel before they can execute their attack. That won't work, Lydia interrupted. The network operates with built-in safeguards. If their key personnel start to disappear, they'll activate their contingency protocols and execute the attack immediately. We'd lose the element of surprise and face the very scenario we're trying to prevent. Colonel Montgomery, who had been monitoring Pentagon security systems, looked up from his tablet with concern. Captain, if these people have been placing personnel throughout our installations for years, how do we know our own security hasn't been compromised? How do we know they're not listening to this conversation right now? Because this room is swept for surveillance devices every 6 hours, and I've been monitoring network communications for the past week. They don't know I've surfaced yet. As far as they're concerned, their operation is proceeding on schedule, and they have no reason to suspect that 12 years of intelligence gathering is about to crashing down on them. Major Flanagan had been studying the attack timeline on his secure laptop. According to this intelligence, the network plans to begin their operation during tomorrow night's joint training exercise between Northcom and Stratcom. They're going to use our own military exercises as cover for their electronic warfare attack. Exactly. Lydia confirmed. During the exercise, multiple military networks will be running simulated scenarios that involve temporary communication disruptions. The network will use this cover to execute their real attack, making it appear that any system failures are part of the planned training until it's too late to stop them. Dr. Strand had been observing Lydia carefully throughout the briefing, noting signs of the psychological strain that 12 years of deep cover had placed on her. Lydia, what you're describing is an incredibly sophisticated operation that required years of planning and coordination. How were you able to infiltrate it and gather this level of intelligence? Lydia was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as she remembered the difficult choices she'd made over the past 12 years. I became someone else, Doc. Not just a different identity, but a different person entirely. I convinced the network that I was a disillusioned intelligence officer who wanted to sell classified information for personal gain. I spent 3 years building that cover identity before they even considered recruiting me. And once you were inside? Fletcher asked. I became their most valuable asset, Lydia replied with a bitter smile. Dr. Elena Vasquez, former Army intelligence officer turned freelance espionage consultant. I provided them with intelligence that was valuable enough to buy my way into their inner circle, but not so valuable that it would actually damage American interests. It was a delicate balance that required me to become everything I'd sworn to fight against. Hawk leaned forward, his voice filled with concern for his friend. Phoenix, what kind of intelligence did you give them? What did you have to sacrifice to maintain your cover? Information that was already compromised through other sources, Lydia said carefully. Old operational details that had already been leaked, personnel information on officers who were already scheduled for reassignment, technical specifications on equipment that was being replaced anyway. Nothing that would actually harm American interests, but everything the network needed to see to believe I was genuine. Director Wolf had been analyzing the network's financial records on his tablet.
The money involved here is staggering. We're looking at transactions worth over $5 billion, spanning 15 years. How did they hide this level of financial activity from federal oversight? By using the defense budget itself as a money laundering system. A $100 million contract for communications equipment becomes a $100 million payment to foreign intelligence services when the equipment is never actually delivered. Cost overruns on legitimate projects become payments for classified intelligence. The network has turned the American defense budget into their personal piggy bank. Agent Cortez finished her phone call and rejoined the discussion. My teams are standing by for coordinated arrests, but if we can't move against the key personnel without triggering their attack, what's our alternative? Lydia smiled grimly. We're going to let them execute their attack. But instead of extracting real intelligence, they're going to download carefully crafted disinformation that will identify every foreign intelligence service and criminal organization they're working with. By the time they realize they've been compromised, we'll have evidence to prosecute not just the American traitors, but their entire international network. The room fell silent as the implications of her plan sank in. They were going to allow the largest cyber attack in American history to proceed, gambling that they could turn the network's own operation against them. It was a strategy that required perfect timing, flawless execution, and absolute trust in intelligence gathered over 12 years of dangerous infiltration work. General Fletcher looked around the room at the assembled personnel, knowing that the next 72 hours would determine whether they prevented a national security catastrophe or accidentally enabled it. Captain Ashworth, as far as the official record is concerned, you don't exist. How do we authorize an operation based on intelligence gathered by someone who legally isn't alive? Lydia reached into her jacket and pulled out a set of credentials that looked different from standard military identification. Protocol 7 operatives don't operate under normal military authority, General. These orders come directly from the National Security Council and supersede any conventional chain of command. As of right now, this operation is classified at the highest possible level.
The weight of 12 years in the shadows had left marks on Lydia that went far deeper than the physical changes her colleagues could observe. As the briefing continued into the evening hours, Dr. Strand found herself studying not just what Lydia was saying, but how she was saying it. The careful way she modulated her voice, the practiced control over her facial expressions, the unconscious habits of someone who had spent over a decade being anyone except herself. Before we proceed with any operational planning, Dr. Strand interrupted, I need to conduct a psychological evaluation. What Captain Ashworth has endured is unprecedented in modern intelligence work. 12 years of deep cover without official support, multiple identity changes, constant threat of exposure. The human mind isn't designed to handle that level of sustained deception. Lydia turned from the wall display, her expression unreadable. Doc, I appreciate your concern, but we don't have time for therapy sessions. The network's attack is scheduled for tomorrow night, and this isn't about therapy, Dr. Strand interrupted firmly. This is about operational security. If you're psychologically compromised, if 12 years of isolation have affected your judgment or perception of reality, then the intelligence you've gathered could be unreliable. We need to know if we can trust not just your information, but your assessment of the situation. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. General Fletcher nodded slowly. Dr. Strand is right. Captain, no one questions your dedication or sacrifice, but we need to be certain that 12 years of deep cover haven't affected your objectivity. Lydia sat down heavily, and for the first time since entering the Pentagon, she looked vulnerable. What do you want to know, Doc? Start with the basics, Dr. Strand said gently, pulling out a tablet to take notes. How many different identities have you maintained over the past 12 years? 7 primary identities, Lydia replied after a moment's hesitation.
Dr. Elena Vasquez was the main cover for infiltrating the network, but I also maintained Sarah Mitchell, a freelance journalist, Rebecca Torres, a defense contractor employee, Maria Santos, a university researcher, and 3 others for shorter-term operations. And during those 12 years, did you ever lose yourself in one of those identities? Did you ever have moments where you weren't sure which person was real? Lydia's composure cracked slightly. Elena had a life, Doc. She had friends, relationships, a career she was proud of. There were times when being Elena felt more real than being Lydia. Times when I almost forgot why I was pretending to be someone else. She paused, her voice growing quieter. There were moments when I wanted to stay Elena forever. Hawk leaned forward, his weathered face filled with concern for his friend. Phoenix, what about the psychological pressure? 12 years of living a lie, constantly looking over your shoulder, never being able to trust anyone completely. How did you handle the isolation? I didn't handle it, Lydia admitted honestly. I endured it. There were nights when I sat in Elena's apartment staring at photographs of the life I'd given up, wondering if anyone even remembered that Lydia Ashworth had ever existed. I wrote letters to you, Hawk. Hundreds of them. Letters I could never send, conversations I could never have. Dr. Strand made notes on her tablet, her clinical training warring with her personal concern for someone she'd known before the mission. Did you ever consider abandoning the operation? Walking away from Protocol 7 and trying to reclaim your original identity? Every day, Lydia replied without hesitation. Especially during the 3rd year when Elena was fully established and the network was starting to trust her. I could have disappeared, created a new life somewhere far from intelligence work and military service. But every time I was tempted to run, I'd think about the soldiers who were dying because of the intelligence the network was selling. Agent Cortez had been listening carefully to the psychological evaluation, and now she spoke up with a question that had been troubling her. Captain, how do we know that 12 years of deception haven't compromised your ability to distinguish between truth and lies? How do we know that the intelligence you've gathered is accurate rather than a reflection of paranoid delusions? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Lydia met it head-on. Because the intelligence can be verified independently, she said, her voice regaining its strength. This isn't the product of a disturbed mind, Agent Cortez. This is 12 years of careful, methodical intelligence gathering by someone who never forgot her training or her mission.
Director Wolf had been reviewing the psychological evaluation protocols on his secure tablet. Dr. Strand, what's your professional assessment? Is Captain Ashworth psychologically capable of leading this operation? Dr. Strand studied Lydia carefully, noting the signs of stress and exhaustion, but also the underlying strength that has sustained her through 12 years of isolation. Captain Ashworth is certainly affected by her experiences. She shows signs of chronic hypervigilance, difficulty with interpersonal trust, and what we might call identity displacement, a psychological adaptation to living multiple personas simultaneously. But, she continued, she also demonstrates remarkable psychological resilience. Her core personality remains intact, her mission focus is clear, and her analytical abilities appear unimpaired. Most importantly, she's maintained her moral compass throughout an operation that required her to do things that went against her fundamental beliefs. Colonel Montgomery looked up from the security reports he'd been reviewing. Captain, Dr. Strand mentioned that you had to provide real intelligence to the network to maintain your cover. Can you give us specifics about what kind of information you compromised? Lydia returned to her seat, her expression becoming more professional as she shifted into operational mode. Personnel rotation schedules for officers who were already scheduled for reassignment, technical specifications for equipment that was being decommissioned anyway, communication protocols that were already scheduled for updating. The key was providing information that seemed valuable to the network, but had no actual operational significance. And they never suspected you were feeding them useless intelligence? Major Flanagan asked. The intelligence wasn't useless to them, Lydia explained. It was real, current, and classified. It just wasn't strategically significant.
The network used it to build relationships with foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations, not to plan actual operations against American interests. Hawk had been studying his friend throughout the psychological evaluation, and now he spoke up with the question that had been weighing on his mind. "Phoenix, what happened to you over there? Not just the operational details, but personally. What did 12 years of being someone else do to the person I used to know?" Lydia looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the pain of years of isolation in her eyes. "The person you knew died in Afghanistan, Hawk. Not literally, but practically. Lydia Ashworth was a young intelligence officer who believed in clear moral boundaries and straightforward solutions. Elena Vasquez learned that the world is much more complicated than that. I had to become someone who could lie convincingly to people who trusted me. I had to build relationships with individuals I was planning to betray. I had to participate in activities that went against everything I'd been taught about honor and duty. The person who came back isn't the same person who left." Dr. Strand leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. "And how do you feel about that transformation? Do you regret the choices you made?" "I regret the necessity of making them," Lydia replied carefully, "but I don't regret the results. The intelligence I've gathered will save lives and protect American interests. The network will be destroyed, and the foreign intelligence services they've been working with will be exposed. If the cost of achieving that was sacrificing the person I used to be, then it was a price worth paying." General Fletcher had been listening to the evaluation with growing respect for what Lydia had endured. "Captain, assuming Dr. Strand clears you for operational duty, what's our next step? How do we proceed with stopping the network's attack?" Lydia smiled, and there was something both determined and dangerous in the expression. "We're going to do something that goes against every instinct we have as military officers, General. We're going to let the enemy think they're winning right up until the moment we destroy them completely." The psychological evaluation was complete, but it had revealed truths that went far beyond Lydia's mental state. It had shown them the human cost of the intelligence war they were fighting, and the sacrifices that individuals made in service of causes larger than themselves. As they prepared to face the network's attack, everyone in the room understood that they were dealing with someone who had already paid the ultimate price for her mission. Not her life, but her identity, her relationships, and the person she had once been. The woman who called herself Lydia Ashworth was ready to complete the operation that had consumed 12 years of her life, but the question remained whether she would be able to find her way back to herself once it was over.
The Pentagon's Situation Room had been transformed into a high-tech command center with additional secure communication lines installed and personnel from multiple intelligence agencies working around the clock. The wall displays showed real-time monitoring of military communications networks across the eastern United States, each installation represented by a green dot that would turn red if the Obsidian network's attack succeeded. Lieutenant Sarah Holloway entered the room carrying an armload of classified briefing materials, her young face grave with the weight of the crisis they were facing. "General Fletcher," she reported, "Northcom has confirmed that tomorrow night's joint training exercise will proceed as scheduled. They're unaware of the network's plans to use the exercise as cover for their attack." Lydia studied the exercise parameters on her secure tablet, noting details that confirmed her intelligence about the network's timing. The exercise involves simulated communication failures between East Coast military installations, she explained to the assembled team. Stratcom will be testing backup communication protocols while Northcom coordinates response procedures. During the exercise, temporary system outages and network disruptions will be considered normal, which gives the network perfect cover for their real attack, Agent Cortez observed grimly. By the time anyone realizes that the communication failures aren't part of the exercise, they'll have already extracted terabytes of classified intelligence. Director Wolf had been coordinating with intelligence agencies across the government, and his latest briefing painted an even more alarming picture. "The scope of tomorrow night's exercise is unprecedented," he reported. "We're talking about 17 major military installations, 3 nuclear facilities, and the entire East Coast air defense network. If the network succeeds in compromising those systems simultaneously, the damage will be incalculable." Major Flanagan looked up from his analysis of the network's attack vectors. "Captain Ashworth, you mentioned that we're going to let them execute their attack while feeding them disinformation. How exactly does that work? How do we control what intelligence they extract? Lydia moved to the central display, highlighting specific network pathways that would be crucial to the operation. For the past 6 months, I've been working with Elena Vasquez's network contacts to identify exactly which systems they plan to target. Using that information, we've prepared false intelligence packages that will be automatically uploaded to those systems during the attack window. The disinformation isn't random. It's specifically crafted to identify every foreign intelligence service and criminal organization that the network has been working with. When they transmit the stolen intelligence to their buyers, we'll be able to trace those transmissions back to their sources and expose the entire international network. Dr. Strand had been studying the psychological profiles of known network members, trying to understand the human element of the conspiracy. The individuals you've identified as network assets, they're not career criminals or foreign agents. They're American citizens with distinguished service records. What happens to them once this operation is complete? They'll be arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Treason is treason, regardless of the perpetrator's background or motivations. Hawk had been reviewing the personnel files of network members he'd known personally, and the betrayal cut deep. Phoenix, when you were Elena Vasquez, did you ever develop genuine relationships with these people? Did any of them become friends? Lydia was quiet for a moment, her expression revealing the emotional complexity of her situation. Elena Vasquez had friends, colleagues, people she cared about. Some of them were genuine patriots who had been deceived by the network's leadership. Others were willing participants who chose money over loyalty. The hardest part of this operation isn't stopping the attack. It's knowing that I'm about to destroy the lives of people who trusted me. Colonel Montgomery had been monitoring Pentagon security systems throughout the briefing, and now he looked up with concern. Captain, if the network has placed personnel throughout our installations, how do we know they don't have assets inside this building? How do we know our operational security hasn't been compromised? Because I've been monitoring network communications for the past week. They're maintaining radio silence until tomorrow night's attack, but their last intercepted transmissions showed no awareness of my return to active status. As far as they know, Elena Vasquez is still a loyal network asset, preparing for the biggest intelligence extraction in history.
Agent Cortez had been coordinating with FBI field offices across the country, preparing for the simultaneous arrests that would follow the network's exposure. The logistics of this operation are staggering, she reported. We're talking about coordinating law enforcement actions across multiple states, involving dozens of federal agencies, and timing everything to occur within minutes of the network's attack. What's our backup plan if something goes wrong? Director Wolf asked. If the network realizes they're being fed disinformation, if they abort their attack, if our coordination fails, what then? Lydia's expression hardened with determination that had sustained her through 12 years of dangerous isolation. Then we implement Protocol 7's final contingency, she said. Elena Vasquez disappears forever, and I go back into deep cover for however long it takes to gather the evidence we need through conventional intelligence gathering. But, Director, that would mean starting this entire operation over from the beginning, and we can't afford to give the network another 12 years to perfect their capabilities. Lieutenant Holloway entered the room again, this time carrying urgent intelligence reports. General, we're receiving confirmation from multiple sources that the network's foreign contacts are positioning themselves to receive large data transmissions tomorrow night. NSA has identified unusual activity from intelligence services in at least 6 different countries. That confirms our timeline, Lydia said, studying the intercept data. The network has been advertising tomorrow night's operation to potential buyers for weeks. They're expecting to deliver intelligence that will fundamentally change the global balance of power. Major Flanagan had been analyzing the technical aspects of the planned disinformation operation. Captain, the false intelligence packages you've prepared, they need to be sophisticated enough to fool professional intelligence analysts. How do we ensure they're believable? By making them 90% accurate. The disinformation contains real intelligence that's already been compromised through other sources, combined with false details that will identify anyone who tries to act on the information. It's a honey trap designed to expose every foreign intelligence service and criminal organization in the network's client base. Dr. Strand had been observing the interactions between team members, noting the stress level that the impending operation was placing on everyone involved.
The stress level in this room is extraordinary, she observed. We're talking about an operation that could either prevent a national security catastrophe or accidentally enable one. How do we maintain operational effectiveness under this kind of pressure? By remembering what we're fighting for, Hawk said firmly. Phoenix has spent 12 years gathering this intelligence, sacrificing everything she was to protect our country. We're not going to let her sacrifice be in vain. General Fletcher stood up, his command presence filling the room as he addressed the assembled team. Ladies and gentlemen, in less than 18 hours, we're going to execute the most complex counterintelligence operation in American history. The success or failure of this mission will determine whether the Obsidian network is destroyed or whether they succeed in compromising our national security for decades to come. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who had dedicated their careers to protecting American interests. Captain Ashworth has given us the intelligence we need to succeed. Now it's up to us to execute the operation with the precision and dedication that her sacrifice deserves. Lydia nodded approvingly, but her expression remained focused on the operational details that would determine success or failure. General, there's one more thing you need to know about tomorrow night's operation. The network's attack isn't just about stealing intelligence. It's also designed to identify and eliminate any threats to their organization. If they discover that Elena Vasquez has been feeding them false information, they won't just abort their mission. They'll try to kill everyone who knows about Protocol 7. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just facing a cyber attack or an intelligence breach. They were facing an organization that was prepared to commit murder to protect their conspiracy. The stakes had just been raised beyond anything they had imagined.
At exactly 2200 hours on Tuesday evening, the joint training exercise between Northcom and Stratcom commenced across 17 military installations on the East Coast. In command centers from Virginia to Maine, military personnel began implementing the simulated communication failures that would provide perfect cover for the Obsidian network's real attack. What none of them knew was that in a secure bunker beneath the Pentagon, a team of intelligence officers was about to fight the most crucial battle of their careers. Lydia sat at the primary monitoring station, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards as she maintained her Elena Vasquez identity through encrypted communications with network operatives across the country. The false intelligence packages had been uploaded to the targeted systems, and now everything depended on timing and execution that had to be perfect down to the second. Network communications are increasing, she reported to the assembled team. Elena's contacts are confirming their readiness to begin the extraction. All network assets are in position. Staff Sergeant Marcus Riley, who had been monitoring Pentagon security systems throughout the operation, suddenly looked up from his screens with alarm. "We have unauthorized personnel in the building," he announced. 3 individuals with valid Pentagon access badges just entered through the river entrance, but their credentials don't match any scheduled appointments. General Fletcher moved to Riley's station, studying the security camera feeds that showed 3 people in civilian clothes moving through the Pentagon's corridors with obvious familiarity with the building's layout. "Do we have identification on these individuals?" "Negative, sir," Riley replied, his hands flying across his keyboard. "The access badges are authentic, but the names don't appear in any personnel database. It's like they exist in the system, but not in any official records." Lydia's blood ran cold as she recognized the implications. "They're network assets," she said, her voice tight with sudden urgency. "Elena Vasquez was supposed to be the only network contact inside the Pentagon tonight. If they're sending additional personnel, it means they suspect something." Agent Cortez was already coordinating with Pentagon security forces via her secure radio. "All units, we have potential hostiles in the building. 3 individuals, exact location unknown, considered armed and extremely dangerous." The lights in the command center suddenly flickered, and several monitoring screens went dark before coming back online. Lieutenant Holloway looked up from her communication station with growing concern. "General, we're experiencing intermittent power fluctuations throughout the building. This doesn't match the pattern of the scheduled training exercise."
"It's starting," Lydia said grimly, her eyes fixed on the network communication channels that were suddenly alive with coded transmissions. "The Obsidian network is beginning their attack. The power fluctuations are cover for them to access the building's primary computer systems." Major Flanagan was coordinating with Northcom and Stratcom, trying to maintain awareness of the exercise parameters while dealing with the real crisis unfolding inside the Pentagon. "Sir, the exercise commanders are reporting unexpected system anomalies at multiple installations, communication failures that weren't part of the planned scenarios." Dr. Strand had been observing Lydia throughout the evening, noting signs of increasing stress as her 12-year operation approached its climax. "Lydia, you need to stay focused on maintaining Elena's identity. If the network realizes their inside contact has been compromised, they'll abort the entire operation." "I know," Lydia replied, her fingers continuing to type responses to network communications even as alarms began sounding throughout the Pentagon. "Elena is confirming that the intelligence extraction is proceeding on schedule. The false data packages are being transmitted to network collection points across the country." Colonel Montgomery burst through the command center door, his face grim with urgent news. "General, building security has lost contact with 3 roving patrols. The unauthorized personnel aren't just wandering the corridors, they're actively hunting our security teams." The implication was clear. The network assets inside the Pentagon weren't just there to gather intelligence. They were there to eliminate anyone who might interfere with the operation. The 3-person team was conducting a systematic search of the building, looking for the source of any potential resistance. Hawk checked his sidearm and moved toward the command center's reinforced door. "How long until the intelligence extraction is complete?" he asked Lydia. 12 minutes, she replied, her voice steady despite the danger closing in around them. "The network needs 12 more minutes to complete their data collection and transmit everything to their foreign contacts. Once that transmission is complete, we'll have identified every intelligence service and criminal organization in their network."
Director Wolf was coordinating with federal law enforcement agencies across the country, preparing for the massive arrest operation that would follow the network's exposure. "All field teams are in position," he reported. "The moment we have confirmation that the disinformation has been transmitted to network clients, we'll initiate simultaneous arrests at over 200 locations." The command center's main display suddenly went dark, and emergency lighting activated throughout the room. Agent Cortez grabbed her radio as communication systems throughout the Pentagon began failing in sequence. "This isn't part of the exercise," she announced. "The network is conducting a real electronic warfare attack on Pentagon systems." Lydia continued typing on her keyboard, now working by the glow of emergency lighting and her laptop screen. "Elena is reporting successful intelligence extraction from Pentagon databases," she told the team. "The network believes they're downloading classified information on nuclear weapon specifications, special operations personnel files, and strategic defense plans. But what they're actually getting is the false intelligence that will expose their entire organization," General Fletcher confirmed. "How much longer?" 8 minutes, Lydia replied. "But General, the network assets inside the building are getting closer. They've systematically disabled our security teams, and they're heading for the classified areas where they know Elena would be operating." The sound of gunfire echoed through the Pentagon's corridors, distant but unmistakable. Staff Sergeant Riley's security monitors showed muzzle flashes in darkened hallways as the network assault team engaged with Pentagon security forces. "They're 3 levels above us," Riley reported, moving methodically toward the classified sections. Hawk positioned himself near the command center's entrance, his weapon drawn and ready. "Phoenix, can you complete the operation from a different location if we have to evacuate this position?" "No," Lydia replied without hesitation. "Elena's access codes are tied to specific Pentagon terminals. If I lose connection now, the network will know their intelligence extraction has been compromised, and they'll abort the entire operation." Dr. Strand moved to Lydia's station, her clinical training focused on keeping her patient functional under extreme stress. "Lydia, your heart rate is elevated and you're showing signs of acute stress response. Can you maintain operational effectiveness?" "I've been maintaining operational effectiveness for 12 years, Doc."
6 more minutes and this nightmare is over. The gunfire was getting closer, and the emergency lighting began to flicker as the network's electronic attack intensified. Lieutenant Holloway was trying to maintain communication with federal law enforcement teams positioned around the country, but Pentagon communication systems were failing rapidly. 5 minutes, Lydia announced. The false intelligence is being transmitted to network collection points. Once it reaches their foreign contacts, we'll have them all. But even as she spoke, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside the command center. The network assault team had found them, and they were running out of time. The next few minutes would determine whether 12 years of sacrifice and deception would end in triumph or catastrophe. The battle for the Pentagon and for the future of American national security was about to reach its climax.
The reinforced door to the command center shuddered under the impact of an explosive charge, and smoke began filtering through the ventilation system as the network assault team prepared for their final push. Hawk positioned himself behind an overturned table, his weapon trained on the entrance, while General Fletcher coordinated the defense of their position via handheld radio. Pentagon security forces are converging on our location, Fletcher reported, but they're dealing with systematic electronic warfare throughout the building. The network has disabled most of our communication and surveillance systems. Lydia never looked up from her keyboard, her fingers flying across the keys as she maintained Elena Vasquez's communications with network operatives across the country. 3 minutes, she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The false intelligence packages are being transmitted to network collection points. We just need 3 more minutes. The command center door exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments and smoke. Through the breach came 3 figures in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind night vision equipment, their weapons sweeping the room with professional precision. The lead operative spotted Lydia at her workstation and immediately understood what she was doing. "Dr. Elena Vasquez?" the operative called out, his voice distorted by electronic voice modulation. "Step away from the computer and identify yourself." Lydia looked up from her screen, and for a moment, everyone in the room could see the 12-year transformation from intelligence officer to deep cover operative. "I'm transmitting the intelligence you requested," she replied, her voice carrying Elena's accent and speech patterns. "The Pentagon extraction is 90% complete." The lead operative moved closer, his weapon lowered but ready. "Elena, we receive reports of compromised security in this section. Are you operating under duress?" It was the moment that 12 years of preparation had been building toward. Lydia had to convince network operatives that she was still Elena Vasquez while simultaneously completing the intelligence operation that would destroy their organization. The success or failure of the entire mission depended on her ability to maintain her cover for just a few more minutes. "The security breach was contained," she replied, gesturing toward the overturned furniture and defensive positions. "Pentagon security forces attempted to interrupt the transmission, but I convinced them it was part of the training exercise. The intelligence extraction is proceeding on schedule." Agent Cortez, crouched behind an equipment rack with her weapon drawn, watched the exchange with growing tension. One wrong word, one suspicious gesture, and the network operatives would realize they were walking into a trap. But she also knew that if she opened fire now, the gunfight would prevent Lydia from completing the transmission. "Elena," the second operative said, studying the command center's layout with obvious suspicion, "why are there so many personnel in this location? This should be a single operator extraction." Lydia's mind raced as she calculated the best response. The Pentagon security protocols required additional clearances for accessing certain databases. These personnel provided the authentication codes I needed to complete the extraction. Dr. Strand, pressed against the wall near the emergency exit, recognized the psychological complexity of what Lydia was doing. She was simultaneously being herself and being Elena, maintaining the cover identity that had sustained her for 12 years while executing the operation that would end that identity forever. 2 minutes, Lydia announced, her voice carrying both Elena's confidence and Lydia's determination. The transmission to network collection points is nearly complete. The third operative moved to a position where he could observe Lydia's computer screen directly.
What he saw there was exactly what Elena Vasquez was supposed to be transmitting: classified intelligence on American military capabilities, personnel files, strategic defense plans. He had no way of knowing that every piece of information was carefully crafted disinformation designed to expose the network's foreign contacts. Major Flanagan, monitoring federal law enforcement communications on his handheld radio, received confirmation that arrest teams across the country were ready to move. The moment the false intelligence reached network clients, simultaneous raids would take down the entire organization. But first, they had to survive the next 90 seconds. Elena, the lead operative said, his voice carrying new urgency, "We're receiving reports of unusual federal law enforcement activity at network facilities across the country. Are you certain this operation hasn't been compromised?" Lydia looked up from her computer screen, and for just a moment, her expression showed the strain of 12 years spent living a lie. "The operation is secure," she said firmly. "The intelligence transmission is complete. Your foreign contacts now have access to the most classified information in the American defense establishment."
It was both truth and deception. The intelligence transmission was indeed complete, but instead of compromising American national security, it had just exposed every foreign intelligence service and criminal organization in the network's client base. The false information Lydia had spent months preparing was now in the hands of enemies who would unknowingly reveal themselves when they tried to act on it. The lead operative received a communication through his earpiece, and his posture immediately changed. "Elena," he said, his weapon rising toward her, "we just received confirmation that federal agents are arresting network personnel across the country. The operation has been compromised." The moment of truth had arrived. Lydia stood up slowly, her hands visible, her expression calm. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice shifting from Elena's accent to her natural speech patterns. "It has been compromised. For 12 years. The revelation hit the operatives like a physical blow. The woman they had trusted, the intelligence asset who had provided them with the most sensitive American military information, was an American intelligence officer who had been feeding them false information and gathering evidence of their treason. "My name is Major Lydia Ashworth, United States Army Intelligence," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "For 12 years, I've been documenting your organization's activities, tracking your financial transactions, and identifying your foreign contacts. The intelligence you just transmitted to your clients will expose every aspect of your conspiracy." The lead operative's finger moved toward his weapon's trigger, but Hawk was faster. His shot caught the operative's center mass, dropping him before he could fire. The command center erupted into gunfire as the remaining network operatives engaged with Pentagon security forces who had finally reached their location. Agent Cortez and Colonel Montgomery provided covering fire, while Dr. Strand and Lieutenant Holloway secured the intelligence equipment that contained the evidence of the network's activities. The firefight was brief but intense, ending when Pentagon security forces overwhelmed the surviving network operatives. As smoke cleared and emergency medical teams arrived to treat the wounded, Lydia remained at her workstation, completing the final transmissions that would ensure every piece of evidence reached federal law enforcement agencies across the country. 12 years of sacrifice, deception, and isolation were finally coming to an end. "It's over," she told General Fletcher, her voice filled with exhaustion and relief. "The Obsidian network is finished. Their foreign contacts are exposed. The traitors will be prosecuted." But even as she spoke, Lydia knew that for her, it wasn't really over. 12 years of being Elena Vasquez had changed her in ways that could never be undone. The woman who had walked into the Pentagon 3 days ago was not the same person who had left for Afghanistan 12 years earlier. The question now was whether she could find a way to become someone new, someone who could live with what she had done in service of her country. 3 weeks after the dramatic events at the Pentagon, the secure conference room had been transformed into a temporary courtroom where federal prosecutors presented evidence against the largest espionage conspiracy in American history. The wall displays that had once shown network communication intercepts now showed a comprehensive organizational chart of over 300 individuals facing charges ranging from treason to conspiracy to commit espionage. Agent Cortez stood at the podium, addressing a room full of federal judges, prosecutors, and intelligence officials. The evidence gathered by Major Ashworth over 12 years of deep cover operations has resulted in the arrest and prosecution of network personnel across 6 countries, she reported. We've identified and neutralized foreign intelligence operations that had been compromising American national security for over 15 years. Lydia sat at the far end of the conference table, wearing her army dress uniform with the rank insignia of a major, the promotion she'd received posthumously during her years of assumed death. The physical transformation was remarkable. 3 weeks of proper nutrition and medical care had restored some of the vitality that 12 years of stress had drained from her. But the psychological changes ran much deeper. Director Wolf reviewed the international implications of the operation on his secure tablet. The false intelligence that Major Ashworth transmitted to network clients has exposed foreign intelligence services in China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, he reported. We now have complete visibility into their collection priorities, operational methods, and personnel assignments. General Fletcher, who had been coordinating with the Joint Chiefs of Staff throughout the aftermath, looked up from his briefing materials. The strategic advantages we've gained from this operation are unprecedented. We've essentially turned the enemy's own intelligence network against them, giving us insights into foreign intelligence operations that would have taken decades to acquire through conventional means. Dr. Strand had been conducting follow-up psychological evaluations on all personnel involved in the operation, but her primary focus remained on Lydia's mental health and adjustment to her return to official existence. Major Ashworth has demonstrated remarkable psychological resilience. However, the process of reintegrating someone who has been legally dead for 12 years presents unique challenges. Hawk, who had been promoted to Sergeant Major in recognition of his role in the operation, looked across the table at his friend with concern that went beyond professional interest. Phoenix, the medical board cleared you for active duty, but are you really ready to return to normal military service? 12 years of deep cover operations, that changes a person. Lydia was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as she considered the question. Normal military service. I'm not sure I remember what that means anymore. Elena Vasquez spent 12 years in the shadows, and Lydia Ashworth was a young intelligence officer who believed the world operated according to clear moral principles. I'm not sure either of those people exists anymore. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Wells, the new Pentagon liaison for Protocol 7 operations, entered the conference room. Classified briefing materials, she said formally. Major Ashworth, the National Security Council has reviewed your service record and the results of your extended operation. They're prepared to offer you any assignment you choose, conventional intelligence work, training duties, administrative positions, or early retirement with full honors. What about Protocol 7? Lydia asked. Are there other operations that require deep cover assets? The question hung in the air with implications that everyone in the room understood. After 12 years of sacrifice and isolation, after successfully completing the most complex intelligence operation in modern history, Lydia was asking if she could return to the shadows rather than reclaim her place in the normal world. Dr. Strand leaned forward, her professional concern evident. Lydia, you've already given 12 years of your life to Protocol 7. You've earned the right to a normal existence, relationships, career advancement, the life that Elena Vasquez never had. Elena Vasquez had a life. She had friends, colleagues, a career she was proud of. The problem is that Elena Vasquez was a lie, and now I'm not sure which parts of her were real and which parts were just operational necessity. Agent Cortez, who had been reviewing the legal implications of the network prosecutions, looked up from her files. Major, your testimony will be crucial for the prosecution of network personnel. These trials could take years to complete. Are you prepared for that level of public exposure after 12 years of maintaining cover identities?
The trials will proceed whether I testify in person or through classified depositions, Lydia answered. The evidence speaks for itself. What I'm trying to determine is whether I have anything to contribute to conventional military service, or whether my value lies in continuing Protocol 7 operations. Major Flanagan had been coordinating with intelligence agencies across the government, tracking the ongoing effects of the network's exposure. Major Ashworth, the intelligence community is still analyzing the ramifications of your operation,
Foreign governments are conducting their own internal investigations, trying to determine how much of their intelligence collection was compromised by the false information we fed to the network. And that's exactly why Protocol 7 needs to continue, Lydia said, her voice gaining strength. The network was just one threat among many. There are other conspiracies, other foreign intelligence operations, other enemies who believe they can operate against American interests without consequence. General Fletcher studied her carefully, recognizing the determination that had sustained her through 12 years of dangerous isolation. Major, if you choose to continue with Protocol 7, it would mean returning to deep cover operations, more years of isolation, more sacrificed relationships, more of the psychological strain that nearly broke you during the network operation. It would also mean preventing future threats before they can compromise American national security, Lydia replied. General, Elena Vasquez learned things that Lydia Ashworth never could have learned. She developed capabilities that conventional intelligence officers don't possess. Protocol 7 operatives can go places and do things that no one else can do. Hawk leaned forward, his weathered face filled with concern for his friend. Phoenix, what about your personal life? What about the relationships you never had, the experiences you missed, the normal existence that every soldier deserves after completing their service? Lydia looked around the room at the faces of people who had supported her operation, who had trusted her intelligence, who had risked their own careers to help her succeed. Hawk, I've learned something important over the past 12 years. Some people are called to conventional service, and some people are called to serve in the shadows. I've found my calling, and it's not behind a desk or in a normal assignment. Dr. Strand made a note in her evaluation file, recognizing that Lydia had made a decision that went against every recommendation for psychological health and personal well-being. Lydia, I have to ask one more time. Are you choosing Protocol 7 because it's what you want, or because it's the only identity you know how to maintain? The question cut to the heart of Lydia's psychological state, and she took a long moment before answering. I'm choosing Protocol 7 because there are threats out there that require someone willing to sacrifice everything to stop them. Elena Vasquez learned things that Lydia Ashworth never could have learned. She developed capabilities that conventional intelligence officers don't possess. Protocol 7 operatives can go places and do things that no one else can do. Lieutenant Colonel Wells opened her classified briefing materials, revealing new intelligence that had been gathered in the weeks following the network's exposure. Major Ashworth, if you're serious about continuing Protocol 7 operations, we have a new threat that requires immediate attention. A defense contractor called Apex Security Solutions has been acquiring classified technology through legitimate contracts, but intelligence suggests they're planning to sell that technology to foreign military organizations. Lydia's expression sharpened with interest. What's the timeline for this operation? Unknown. It could take anywhere from 2 to 10 years to fully infiltrate their organization and gather the evidence needed to expose their activities. It would require you to assume a new identity, relocate to a different part of the country, and once again disappear from official existence. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. After 12 years of sacrifice and isolation, after successfully completing one of the most complex intelligence operations in history, Lydia was being offered the chance to do it all over again. I'll need 48 hours to review the operational parameters, but General, I think you know what my answer is going to be. As the briefing concluded and personnel began filing out of the conference room, Hawk remained behind with Lydia, both of them knowing that this might be their last conversation for many years to come. Phoenix, you don't have to do this. You've already given more than anyone has the right to ask. Lydia smiled, and for a moment, he caught a glimpse of the young intelligence officer he'd known 12 years ago. Hawk, I've learned something important over the past 12 years. Some people are called to conventional service, and some people are called to serve in the shadows. I've found my calling, and it's not behind a desk or in a normal assignment.
6 months after the dramatic events at the Pentagon, the autumn wind carried the scent of fallen leaves across Arlington National Cemetery as Sergeant Major Joaquin Hawk Reyes stood before the memorial wall where Lydia Ashworth's name had once been listed among the dead. The black granite had been updated with new text.
Major Lydia M. Ashworth, U.S. Army Intelligence, on extended assignment, Protocol 7 operations. Dr. Penelope Strand approached from behind, her footsteps soft on the pathway between the headstones. "Any word from her?" she asked quietly, though they both knew the answer. "She's gone ghost again," Hawk replied, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of pride and sadness. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Senior Technology Consultant for Apex Security Solutions. New identity, new life, new mission. The only difference this time is that we know she's out there. The investigation into Apex Security Solutions had revealed a conspiracy even more sophisticated than the Obsidian network. While the network had focused on selling stolen intelligence, Apex was developing and selling advanced military technology to foreign governments, including radar-defeating stealth capabilities and autonomous weapon systems that could fundamentally alter the global balance of power. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Wells had briefed them on the latest intelligence just that morning. Apex's leadership included former Pentagon officials, retired military officers, and defense industry executives who had legitimate access to the most advanced American military technology. They weren't stealing classified information, they were legally acquiring it through government contracts and then illegally selling enhanced versions to America's enemies. The psychological evaluation before she left was concerning, Dr. Strand admitted. 12 years of deep cover operations had changed her in fundamental ways. She's developed an almost supernatural ability to become other people, but she's also lost touch with who she really is underneath all those identities. Hawk nodded, remembering their final conversation before Lydia disappeared into her new cover identity. She'd seemed more relaxed than she had since returning from the network operation, as if the prospect of returning to the shadows was actually comforting rather than troubling. "She told me something before she left. She said that Elena Vasquez had taught her that sometimes the greatest service requires the greatest sacrifice, but Rebecca Martinez was going to teach her that sometimes sacrifice becomes a calling rather than a burden." The memorial wall reflected their images as they stood in contemplative silence. Around them, other visitors paid their respects to fallen heroes, unaware that one of those heroes was very much alive and once again risking everything to protect the country that most people would never know she served. General Augustus Fletcher had driven out to Arlington to join them, his official vehicle parked discreetly among the civilian cars. As one of the few people authorized to know about Protocol 7 operations, he carried the weight of sending soldiers into the shadows where they might disappear for years or decades. "The Apex operation is already showing results," he reported, his voice low enough that only Hawk and Dr. Strand could hear. "Rebecca Martinez has successfully gained employment with their research division, and she's already identified several classified projects that shouldn't exist in a private company." Dr. Strand frowned with professional concern. "General, what's the psychological support structure for this operation? How do we prevent her from losing herself completely in another long-term deep cover assignment?" "Protocol 7 has evolved since the network operation," Fletcher replied. "We've established discrete communication channels that allow operatives to maintain minimal contact with their support networks. It's not much, but it's better than the complete isolation she endured for 12 years. Hawk looked up at the memorial wall, reading the names of soldiers who had died in conventional combat, wondering how many other names represent people who are still alive, but living in the shadows. "How many Protocol 7 operatives are active?" he asked. "Need-to-know basis," but then added quietly, "enough to address the threats that conventional intelligence services can't handle. The world has become more complex, more dangerous. We need people who can disappear completely and operate without official support for as long as necessary." A black sedan pulled up to the cemetery entrance, and Agent Brielle Cortez stepped out, her expression grim as she approached their small group. "General, we have an urgent development in the Apex investigation. Our surveillance teams have identified foreign intelligence operatives conducting their own investigation of the company, which means other governments know about Apex's activities. They're either trying to acquire the technology for themselves
or trying to expose the operation to embarrass the United States. Dr. Strand realized the implications immediately. If foreign intelligence services are investigating Apex, then Lydia could be walking into a situation where she's not just infiltrating an American conspiracy, but potentially exposing herself to hostile foreign operatives.
Hawk felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same anxiety that had plagued him during Lydia's 12 years of assumed death. Can we warn her? Can we extract her if the situation becomes too dangerous? Protocol 7 operatives are authorized to maintain complete operational autonomy, Fletcher replied. Rebecca Martinez will make her own decisions about risk assessment and mission parameters. Our job is to trust her judgment and support her mission however we can. Agent Cortez opened her secured tablet, showing intelligence reports that painted an increasingly complex picture. The foreign operatives aren't just investigating Apex, they're investigating Rebecca Martinez. Someone has connected her employment at Apex with unusual intelligence activity, and they're starting to ask questions about her background. The group fell silent as they absorbed the implications. Less than 6 months into her new operation, Lydia was already facing exposure that could compromise not just her mission, but her life. The shadows she had chosen to inhabit were becoming increasingly dangerous. There's something else, Agent Cortez continued. We've intercepted communications suggesting that some former network members who avoided prosecution are now working with Apex. They may have intelligence about Protocol 7 operations that could help them identify Rebecca Martinez as a deep cover operative. Dr. Strand looked around at the faces of people who cared about Lydia's well-being, knowing that they were powerless to help her. She's out there completely alone, facing enemies who may already know who she really is, and there's nothing we can do except trust that 12 years of experience have prepared her for whatever she encounters. Hawk reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a new envelope, this one sealed with Rebecca Martinez's handwriting rather than Lydia Ashworth's. She gave me this before she left, he said. Same instructions as before. Don't open unless something impossible happens. General Fletcher studied the envelope with expressions of respect and concern. Protocol 7 operatives understand the risks better than anyone else. Major Ashworth, Dr. Martinez, chose this mission knowing exactly what she was walking into. As the sun began to set over Arlington Cemetery, casting long shadows across the memorial walls, the small group of people who knew the truth about Lydia Ashworth's sacrifice stood in silent tribute to all those who served in ways that can never be acknowledged. The woman they had known as Phoenix, Alina, and now Rebecca was somewhere in the darkness protecting a nation that would never know her name. The memorial wall reflected the fading daylight, and Hawk could almost see Lydia's reflection among the names of the honored dead. A reminder that some heroes serve not by dying for their country, but by living for it in ways that require them to sacrifice everything except their dedication to duty. The legend of Protocol 7 continued, carried forward by individuals who chose to become ghosts rather than let their country face its enemies alone. In corporate boardrooms and foreign capitals, in secret laboratories and secret meetings, the shadows held guardians who would never be recognized, never be thanked, and never be forgotten by those who understood the true cost of freedom. Somewhere in those shadows, Rebecca Martinez was beginning another mission that might last years or decades, knowing that when it was over, she would face the same choice again, return to the light or remain in the darkness where she could do the most good. The envelope in Hawk's pocket carried the weight of another promise, another set of instructions for a situation that might never come. But like the woman who had given it to him, he would carry it faithfully, maintaining the connection between the shadows and the light, between the heroes who could be acknowledged and the heroes who could never be known. As night fell over Arlington Cemetery, the memorial wall stood as a testament to sacrifice in all its forms. Those who had died in battle, and those who had chosen to live in exile for the sake of their country's security. The greatest heroes, it seemed, were often the ones whose names could never be carved in stone, whose service could never be celebrated, and whose sacrifice would never be fully understood except by those who chose to follow them into the shadows. The story of Major Lydia Ashworth was over, but the legend of Protocol 7 was just beginning.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.